So, welcome, Cam, to the Overseas Athlete Podcast. Thank you very much for agreeing to jump on.
Cheers, Chris. Pleasure to be here.
No, excellent. Well, look, we'll dive straight into it. Obviously, as the name suggests, we will speak about your exploits overseas and how that all came about. But if you could just take us back to the beginning around when did you become a professional footballer? How did that start? And sort of lead us on from where you started, where you went to, and how you finished.
Yeah, so my dad played professionally in Scotland. So I guess we had an overseas trip. I think when I was like 6 or 7, and came back from there, and then kind of just fell in love with the game. Just kind of seeing my cousins in that play, and kind of went from there, and came back at 7 or so and started playing, and just kind of played all my junior football in Melbourne. And got to, I think, was at 14, and went to the AIS. Was kind of the first kind of major stepping stone for me, and having Ernie Merrick as coach, who was obviously well known across Australian football. So he was he was my coach there for a couple of years, and went from the VIS up into Canberra to the AIS, into the Institute, when they had their football program, and that was Steve O'Connor was my coach there. And Ray Junner was the assistant. And obviously we had whoever everyone knows, Ron Smith, who would kind of oversee the program and pop in here and there. So, and that was a huge thing. Obviously, back then it was kind of seen as a massive privilege to get into the Institute. So that was a big step just for me football wise, and I guess moving away from home at 17, and obviously finishing off school as well. So that was a big move for me. And then I was there for 2 years. I saw out both scholarships, and then eventually moved overseas. I went to Portugal first, and I was there for a season at Porto. So signed there as a youth player. Spent a year there, which was great, which is a phenomenal club in itself, and just the players you're surrounded by, and what you kind of see firsthand is kind of what you always dream of doing as a kid. So. I was there a season. Then after that, I went to Holland, signed at Venlo in the second division there. So that was my first senior contract over there, which was, again, going from kind of junior youth football majority of the time to kind of senior football, to a team that was going for promotion. That we did get promoted that year, and surrounded by a lot of seasoned professionals. Was tough. Especially being away overseas in the middle of winter at a young age. So yeah, that was a big eye opener for me. Just kind of accommodation, not having anyone. It wasn't like today where we had phones and you could just kind of hop on and just see your parents or your friends, and it was a little bit of a different time. So, but all in all, it was I wouldn't have changed anything. It was great. Like I was playing football. I was doing what I wanted to do. I was in Europe. I was playing. So I spent a year there, and I had a year option, but I didn't see that out. And I came back because I didn't play enough that season. There was a couple of loan options that they wanted to see out, but I just didn't want to do them. So I came back to Australia and ended up playing in the Victorian Premier League at the time for a couple of years, before heading to Adelaide United. So I had a couple of run of injuries while I was back in the Premier League. A couple of setbacks, but eventually got to Adelaide and spent 5 seasons there, which was fantastic. Was lucky enough to win the first FFA Cup at Hindmarsh, which was great. So one of the highlights for me there. And then spent a year at Newcastle before heading over to India for 2 seasons, and Indonesia for, I'd say, 4 months, which is a bit chaotic. So yeah, in short, that's kind of. That was my path and kind of my career in a nutshell. So, yeah, very, very lucky, very fortunate. Saw a lot of places, met a lot of good people, a lot of good and bad experiences. So yeah.
Fantastic. I'll go back to the beginning then, obviously, and going from, say, the AIS to Porto. Like that's a big step, obviously, getting to the AIS. Because how old are you now?
I'm 36 now.
Okay, so you're younger than me. You're about 6 years younger than me. But when I was young, growing up, obviously the QAS we're up here in Queensland, and the AIS was the place to be. Do you find that it's obviously not around anymore, but the sort of the experience you had at the AIS and that sort of full-time football program. Do you think that sort of got you ready for moving overseas? And was that the aim of being in the AIS at that time? Was your next step to look overseas?
I think definitely, yeah. Because that was that transition time as well between NSL and A-League. So there was, I think while we were there was the National League was just finishing. So it was obviously a lot of grey area to what was going to happen with our national competition. So kind of, I think in the back of, all of our heads when we were there, it was, kind of become better footballers, and we are full-time now because, I think we were racking up maybe 10 to 12 sessions a week. So going from, 3 to 4, potentially 5 at your local institute to, kind of 10 to 12 sessions a week. So I think I've spoken to a lot of people that have been through the AIS, and they've kind of said the same things. I think when you're at your junior clubs in your local institute, you kind of you're learning like the fundamentals of football. You're developing your technique and you're learning how to play the game. But I don't think until you got to the AIS, you really learn and understand actually how to play the game. And I think it just took you to a whole new level. And obviously, you're traveling a lot with the AIS. You're getting exposed to overseas tournaments, overseas trips. We went to South America a lot, went to Italy. And you're surrounded, I guess, by what they see as the best bunch of 22 players in the country, and just surrounded by obviously the staff and all the other professional sports. So you live and breathe it, and I think it does. It definitely prepares you for when you go over in terms of how much football you're going to be kind of playing and training. But in saying that, I don't think nothing can prepare you for actually moving overseas. So, and depending where you go, it's obviously a good or bad experience, but yeah, all in all, I think the prep going there, and I think that's missed a lot now since closing down. I think it's a big loss for juniors coming through, and understanding the game at a whole new level as well. I think which was great.
And do you think that's, as you sort of touched on there, like was that more? Do you think like obviously the load of the training, the games, the travel at the AIS, compared to say now maybe even an A-League youth team, do you think like they're sort of missing that both technical and tactical aspect of the game, along with, I guess, getting your body conditioned to go overseas?
Yeah, I think maybe the conditioning part, because I don't think anyone would train that much anymore. Definitely not. Because I obviously work with a number of A-League clubs now, and I kind of know their programs for the NPL teams. The youth team. So again, I think the environment's changed. I think football's changed a little bit. I think in terms of being like tactically kind of aware, and I think a lot of the A-League clubs are on that. They've kind of, that's probably more prominent now than it was back then, doing the tactical side and the analysis side of the game. But I think that for example, NPL clubs, they'll play. So the A-League clubs that play in the NPL competition, they'll play 26 games a year, and then they're done. And then they've got a break for whatever 2 or 3 months. They're back to training. They're waiting for the next season because there's no youth league like there was, say 15 years ago. So in terms of their loading, in terms of their game, the amount of games they play per year, I think it lets them down quite a bit in terms of prepping. And that's not saying we're not producing good players, because we are, because we've seen that over the last few years with the amount of players that have started going back overseas. So, but I think the lack of games kind of doesn't help them in the long run, because there's players overseas that are 18, 19 that are racking up 50, 60 games a year, where our boys are playing 25, 30 games max a year. So I think that's one of the big shortfalls of not having those institutes, and I guess not having an all-round year competition for those players coming through the system.
Yeah, no, definitely. And as you say, the kids over there, like you've gone from the AIS to Porto. I've got no doubt those kids would have been up to 40, 50 games a year, even in their youth teams.
Yeah, definitely. We're in season, then we'd go away. We'd go to a tournament in Switzerland or wherever it might be, come back, continue the season, and then there was post-season stuff. So yeah, it was and the breaks weren't as long as well. The breaks were pretty similar to kind of the first team. So you'd get, you know, before 4 weeks off, then you're back, and you've got preseason tournaments, and then so yeah, the games that they play over there are a lot more, and that kind of happens, I think, and I've said this before, I think from up to 13, 14, I think we're on par, but then that gap starts to get bigger and bigger because, you know, the amount of games and the amount of training sessions that they're doing at that level over there compared to what we're doing here.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. And I think you're right with the age as well. I sort of said up to that 12, 13, I think over here we are, you know, probably very level, but then it does break away. And I think it's the same. It's the games, it's the intensity, it's the load and the conditioning to do that. But no, that's fantastic. What a start. And how, so what I'm interested in is how did the move to Porto come about at that age? You're at the AIS. Who contacts you? Who sort of sets it up? How do you get there? You know, from a behind the scenes point of view.
Yeah, so I was actually I was back in Melbourne just for a break, and because I had Ernie at the VIS, he was actually at Melbourne Victory now. So Melbourne Victory were up and running, and back then the men's VPL competition, Victorian Premier League, they used to select a stateside, and they used to go away on a trip. And before they went away, they actually had teed up a friendly with Melbourne Victory. So this is in the first season of the A-League. So when I came back, Ernie just said, you know, come down and keep fit and train while you're here. So I went down and just played in a friendly with Victory against the men's state team. And yeah, look, my dad was just there, obviously watching with a couple of other people, and just met some guy there whose son was already overseas in Portugal, and his son was actually Diogo Ferreira that ended up playing at Melbourne Victory, played at Brisbane Roar. So Diogo was already there. I didn't know him. I didn't know them. My dad didn't know his dad. And he just asked that, you know, what was Cam's plans? I was coming to the end of the second year of my scholarship at the AIS, and just said that, you know, I was looking to go overseas. And that was kind of it. So I had a bunch of DVDs from all our trips, from all our games, from the last couple of years, and just kind of, again, back then putting together some footage took a long time. So, just got that together and just sent it over to a couple of clubs. And, Porto found out that I was potentially going to go to another club. And they said, no, bring him here first. And if we don't like what we see, he can go on to somewhere else. But I ended up staying, which was great.
So no agents involved, no major contract negotiations, just like someone seen you. And sometimes that's all it takes. It's like someone sees you, they go, you know, and like that, having his son already over there, it gives you a bit of an in. So yeah, putting together, I suppose, the DVDs, the footage, which would have been difficult back then to get all that together. And then so they've looked at it, they've gone, yeah, we like what we see. Was it then like come over, have a look, they could see you sort of in the flesh, get to meet you and go from there?
Yeah, pretty much. They said come over for a week. Because in short, I was going to go to Celtic, and obviously my dad being from Scotland, my family was there, but it didn't really suit me. Just being over there, I thought, you know, going to Portugal would be a better option for myself, even from my dad's point of view as well. So we kind of waited up, and then we said, look, if nothing happens in Portugal, we can shoot off to Scotland and go there. So yeah, they just said get over here and come for a week. And obviously I was lucky because Diogo was already there, and he's Australian and he spoke fluent Portuguese, so that helped a lot. But his dad was kind of he was an agent at the time, and he just worked with a lot of people in Portugal. Obviously, he had a lot of contacts there, and yeah, just went over. And I think after the third or fourth day, they said they wanted to keep me and sign me on. And again, it was pretty straightforward. There was no kind of big negotiations then. It was just a good, just a standard kind of youth contract. But being a foreigner was obviously a little bit different. A kind of few boxes to be ticked. But yeah, it was pretty straightforward. The probably only thing that took a while was to get my clearance, just because I was underage as well. And my family wasn't over there, so that took a little bit of time. But otherwise, it was pretty straightforward.
Well, that's good. Probably different now, isn't it? I think there's a lot of changes around that, you know, depending on the passport you have or the passport maybe your parents have. It's not as straightforward now to get into Europe, but it's good that you got there. And how did that feel, like that when they said, yeah, we want to sign you, and it's Porto, you know what I mean? Like it's one of the biggest clubs of the world. Like that must have been an awesome feeling.
Yeah, look, it's Yeah, it was really cool at the time, and it was just it's kind of hard to remember a lot of it. It's kind of a blur. I think a lot of the football back then is a bit of a blur to me. But going there, and I guess kind of it's weird because you kind of go there and you don't know what to expect, and you kind of hear about, you kind of have to prove yourself until the team starts liking you, and boys will kind of latch onto you, and otherwise you kind of just get. And it's true that does happen, because you can kind of see in the first couple of days, again, they're like, why are you here? Because, why would you come from Australia all the way to Portugal? They see Australia as like a paradise. And, why would you come live here? Because they've been obviously grafting for their entire childhood. And then and then you kind of, I guess if you're fortunate enough to do well and they can see that you can play with alongside them, then they kind of start gravitating towards you. And I think that's when you you start feeling at home a little bit, because then you have that connection with them. I think if you're on the outer, or if you're not kind of there, or if you get to the point where you're not playing and you're a bit isolated, I think you can feel a little bit left out. Fortunately, I was in a good position where I was playing quite regularly. Plus, I had the support of, obviously, Diogo was there, and I had another boy in my team who was from Canada, also spoke fluent Portuguese. And we lived together. So that helped with that transition as well, going there. But all in all, it was massive for me. It was obviously my dad was massive. It was massive for him as well. Just I guess the amount of hours and effort they put in when I was younger. It was at the time, it was a dream come true, especially to be at a club like that.
Yeah. No, amazing experiences. And as you say, it feels like a long time ago now, and a lot of football's happened since then.
Yeah.
But yeah, what a way to start. It's amazing.
Yeah, no, it was a good time.
So how did then the move from Portugal to Holland come about?
So I had a year with a year
that?
option. And what happened was, at the time, so I was in the under-19s, and then in the structure at Porto was under-19, and then they had a senior B team, and then they had their first team. And in that season that we were in, obviously the two other big clubs are Benfica and Sporting. In that season, they got rid of their senior B team because they didn't see a point of it. They said, well, we'll have our youth team, and then we can send players on loan, and then the others can stay and go to the first team. So in that next season, Porto decided to do that as well. So they got rid of the B team. So anyone that would just go, or they'd go on loan. And so that's why I ended up going to Holland, because I wasn't going to make that jump straight to first team. So that's when I went there. And their whole deal was like, you can go on loan to Venlo, and then you can progress there. Obviously, it's second division, it's in Holland. See how you progress over the next year. And I, again, through the same person, through Diogo's dad, he helped me get that. And I signed there for that season. And yeah, it was just it was hard. That was probably the hardest point I'd seen so far in football, just going there to Holland. Just because it was senior football, you're not dealing with kids anymore or people your own age. You're dealing with, like, some of the players in the team had played, over 200 games, first and second division. All great off the pitch, all very good professionals, but you could just see the hardened seasoned pros and and then you kind of saw how much kind of football meant to the club getting promoted, and all that involved as well. And, good, players that were 24, 25, 26, getting good contracts, moving to bigger clubs in Holland at the time. So that was a big eye opener. But the biggest thing was going there, I think, coming to winter and then being in Holland in winter, kind of getting through that. Everyone talks about, in the UK, it's, you have daylight for about 6 or 7 hours and then it's dark again and it's freezing. And it's true, because it's literally that. And you just you're kind of just seeing the winter period. It feels like forever. It feels like 3 months, feels like 6 months. So you don't know whether you put feet warmers on. If you had them, you couldn't have them. You had 3 pairs of socks on, you couldn't get your boots on. The ground was frozen. There was snow. But yeah, that was, I think, the toughest point to date, going, into my football career. That was the hardest point. And I guess, and being away from, obviously, in Australia as well. And the worst thing is when it's winter there and it's freezing, everyone's in summer here on the beach and
On the beach.
on holidays, and you're just kind of, freezing away and locked yourself in your room or in your house. And, but, again, you're there because you want to be there. It's just kind of getting through those little periods with kind of the support system you have there as well. So,
and in saying that, and you mentioned it earlier, obviously back then, there's not the support system in regards to you can't just get on FaceTime with your parents or friends. So how did you, like, that's a tough time. How did you get through that, sort of reminding yourself why you were there? And, when it's freezing cold, you got 3 pairs of socks on and it's icy outside and you're like, what am I doing here? And especially being a foreigner, like, how did you sort of manage that? What did you do to get through that?
Yeah, look, at that point, I obviously spoke to my parents quite a lot, on the phone, a lot of emails, and then I was actually quite lucky when I went to Holland as well, because although everyone speaks a lot of English there, one of the boys in the team was from Canada also, so we got along really well. He was there for that season, and he was injured quite a bit, so he was just he was pretty free doing anything what he was doing outside of training. So we kind of got along, and we were kind of together quite a bit. So he helped with that, and he was quite a bit older than me. I think he was 4 to 5 years older, so which was great. And still keep in contact with him now, which is which is kind of rare in football. But yeah, no, he was a big support system. And then one of my good mates came over for about 8-10 weeks. In that kind of Christmas period. And then I actually went to Scotland for that Christmas break, saw my family there, which was good because it was obviously a short flight. And then my mum ended up coming over kind of the back end of the season, the back end of that season. So that helped. I think if my mate didn't come over for the 8-10 weeks, it would have been a lot tougher because that was probably through that coldest part, that period. And then obviously my mum coming over, she was there for like 6 to 8 weeks as well. Like they did a bit of traveling around as well, but not just with me the whole time. But, having them there was huge at the time. Because at the time I was there, I was like, do I go back home? Do I stay? Is it worth being here? I can go home and kind of reset the button and, kind of just kick off somewhere else again? Or do I move countries? So it's hard when you're that young. You don't know really what's going on. You don't know the ins and outs. You're just kind of, plodding along. And again, agents there. I had one, obviously Diogo's dad was here. I'd speak to him quite often, but the ones over there, you kind of, you don't really know them. You don't know how much you can trust them. You don't know if they're doing everything with the right intention. And again, being so young and kind of vulnerable and naive, you just kind of go along with it and potentially get taken kind of for granted in, certain situations.
And when you're sort of there and then, so you were there for 1 year with a 1 year option.
Yes.
Were you still contracted to Porto? Did you say you went there?
Yeah,
on
at the
loan?
time, yeah. So it was just because they wanted to see obviously see me progress. But once they ended that first season, obviously then they cut ties with me, Porto, and then I was going to go into the second year of the Venlo contract. But because they got promoted, I think as they got promoted, they'd already signed probably 5 or 6 new players. Obviously, they were going up a division, so they needed to. So then I was like, okay, I need to go on loan somewhere else to get more games because I'd only played, I think, 4 or 5 that season. So, and I was obviously playing second team if I didn't play first team. So it wasn't just a lack of football; it was just lack of first team football. But their loan options we didn't really like or agree to. Just the clubs that they wanted me to go to. So then at the time, I just said I'm going to come home, and kind of got in touch with another agent back home, and just kind of told them my intentions to get back home and what I wanted to do, and just because I wanted to start playing again. Spoke to Ernie, and he's like, just come back and kind of start playing football again, get some games, and kind of reset, and see where it takes you. And that's how I ended up back in Melbourne.
And then with the those sort of, just as you mentioned, like the loan options there, so is that when, so you're not just to sort of summarize a little bit, you're not playing like first team football week in, week out. So is that a point where the club comes and says, look, Cam, you're not getting a run, they'll sort of put that on you to say, look, we want to loan you out more so than you saying, I want to go and play some more first team football?
I think it was a bit of both. Again,
Yeah.
I wanted to play. I didn't want to keep playing youth football because I wanted to kind of step into. I was obviously first time. I was full time with the first team. I never actually trained with the. I just kind of would play there. So I think I was speaking with my agent at the time, like Diogo's dad at the time, and just said that I need to play more games. So we need to either seek a loan option or kind of leave. And then as obviously they got promoted, that obviously I wasn't going to play the next season, or they didn't see me playing straight away, or in that, because the players they were bringing in were really good as well, and they needed to. So yeah, we looked at a couple of options. They provided a couple of options. They were speaking with other clubs, but again, they just kind of didn't suit what we wanted to do. And then they kind of left it up to us. So they said, these are the kind of options for the loan options. If you can find something else, by all means. And then we didn't, and we just kind of ran out of time, and then just said, I'll go back home and just kind of come back and play. I actually came back, went to Victory. Ernie's like, you need to play some games because you're clearly underdone in terms of matches played. So I ended up coming back and playing for Melbourne Knights for a couple of seasons. So and all in all, I think it was good. I ended up, I came back and played a lot. I had a couple of injuries, but at the time it was the right thing to do. I think.
Yeah, and I was going to say it sometimes, and like for younger kids out there who might be overseas and finding it a bit tough, and maybe things aren't going as well as they'd hoped. I don't think there's anything wrong sometimes if you can step back and look at a bigger picture and maybe go, all right, maybe you can go home, just, sort of to reset, I suppose, be around family and friends, get a bit of that joy back, get a bit of that drive back, and then start again.
Yeah, and then that was it. Even I spoke to my dad, and he's like, come home and get playing, because at the time the Victorian Premier League was very strong. There's a lot of obviously ex-NSL players that had come back to their states, that had finished, they were playing, so it was a very good competition. And yeah, I went straight to Melbourne Knights, where Chris Taylor was coach. Obviously, he's been coaching in the Premier League here for a long time, and very successful. So went there and was surrounded by a lot of ex-pros, and a lot of like good young players my age that were coming through the system, like Ivan Franic, Mate Duganzic, that have all, obviously everyone knows Ivan, but Mate played at Victory. And then, ex-pros, Steve Yosifidis, Alex Kiritzoglu, Joe Spiteri. So a lot of these players that have played at the highest level, I was kind of surrounded by them, which was great. So I spent, a couple of years there, and I had a couple of little injuries at the time, which a little bit setbacks, but played a couple of seasons there, and I think it did me a world of good. And I got to the point where I went injury free, and then kind of made my way back into that professional environment. But when I came home, I didn't stop. I think I kind of went back. I went to uni. I started uni and had a part-time job, I think, here and there. But I was training every day. There was no way I was going to kind of just stop and not keep giving it a crack to get back to the top. And it kind of paid off in the end.
Yeah, and when you came back, was the goal to end up back overseas, or was the goal like that because the A-League had started and kicked off, that was the place you wanted to at least try and get into to start?
Yeah, no, the goal was definitely to get into the A-League at the time, and that was my short-term goal, and definitely my long-term goal was to get back over. But I just, again, short-term goal was to come back and play, and then I could see a lot of the boys that were my age that were we spent the AIS together in under 20s together that had signed at A-League clubs while I was overseas. So when you're sitting back and you're seeing that happen, it kind of makes you a bit envious, and you don't want to keep missing out on the opportunities that kind of they've got or they've been given. So I just kind of worked my ass off on the day to day. If I wasn't training at nights, which was 3 times a week, I'd be training by myself or with someone else that was in kind of my same position. And that was the goal. I don't think it was. I think I gave myself. I think my dad said, give yourself maybe 1 or 2 years to get back, maybe 3, and if it doesn't happen by then, just start looking at doing something else. And fortunately enough, in that kind of 2-3 year period, that couple of years, I ended up getting back to where I wanted to be. So But yeah, there was times there where I didn't think I was going to get back, definitely, because other people are getting signed. Clubs are coming to watch. I was injured, bad timing, and you just kind of think maybe it's not going to happen.
And was that like your own mentality thinking, although always those doubts are there for different reasons, but did you always think, yeah, I can do it? I've just got to keep working and something will happen?
Yeah, look, I definitely think always I thought that I was good enough, just because I knew that the players that were playing there, and I knew who they were. I knew I was in that same category, and it was just about getting an opportunity and then taking that opportunity as well. So never doubted my ability. Definitely not, and I don't think I wasn't going to get that far and then start doubting myself.
Yeah.
But again, that just come through, and I was one to never stop. I wasn't going to just not train or not work on things. And I think that's kind of what got me there. I could have easily just trained 3 nights a week, and I don't think it would have happened. So continuing
extras,
that,
isn't it?
yeah, continuing that 5 or 6 days. But I think I was lucky too, because there was obviously players that were my age as well that had the same goal, so we could do stuff together. So I wasn't always just by myself. So you need those people around you as well. You can't just be thinking that you're going to go to a park by yourself. Yes, it will help, but having those 2 or 3 other people around in the same situation as me definitely went a long way, and they all went and played at a high level as well, which was good.
Yeah, it's just networking as well. So just getting around the same people with the same goals and sort of pushing each other, I suppose, as well, isn't it? It's, as you say, you can go to the park by yourself, but there's only so many times you can keep motivated to do that. Whereas if you've got other people, it's like going to the gym, isn't it? Like you go by yourself, but if you can go with someone else as a training partner, and like that same mentality, same drive, it definitely helps. And that would be good advice to youngsters that are trying to break through is get around others with the same goals as you.
That's it. That's it. In my role now, I guess with the PFA, it's just kind of my role is kind of to think outside of football and kind of prepare them for maybe potentially life away, but at the same time, a clear message is to there's stuff that you can do away from football, and that who you surround yourself with is going to take you a long way. And that might not just be in football terms, but even your social kind of part of your life. You want to surround yourself with good people that are ambitious, that are goal orientated, that have good intentions, because that you just feed off that. And obviously that, you're a product of kind of your environment, and that will take you a certain way. Obviously you got to do your own hard work, and you got to do everything you have to do to get where you want to get to. But having those good people around you definitely does take you a long way. So yeah, and that was, I guess, my dad was there the whole way. And my mum was there the whole way. Obviously, she wasn't involved in football, but I always had him as a good guide, and he would always, he was always critiquing me when I needed to be critiqued, and that's since I was young, he was always doing that in a good way, though. He wasn't the overbearing psycho dad that you can see on the side of the park. So,
never seen any. Don't know what you're talking about.
So I was lucky. He was hard, but he was fair and intimidating, but I don't think he wasn't crazy like I've seen today, or even when I was a junior as well. So
I imagine. Well, fast forwarding a little bit, so then you've had a 5-6 year career in the A-League, obviously 100 odd games for Adelaide and then Newcastle, and then was it India after that?
Yeah, I spent a year at Newcastle, and I was actually kind of in no man's land after Newcastle. Actually, I was just kind of didn't know what was happening, and I was just back home. And Sean Rooney, that used to play at Newcastle Jets, he'd spent a year or 2, I think, playing Bangalore, which is the club I ended up signing for. And I'd never spoken to Sean in my life, and he just kind of messaged me on, I think it was on Facebook at the time, and he just said, "Hey Cam, I've just come back from India last couple of years. They're looking for a midfielder. Would you be interested in going?" And I was like, "Well, yeah, why not?" Because I had nothing kind of coming up. There was a couple of things, but nothing concrete. So I'm like, "Yeah, I'll have a chat to whoever wants to have a chat to me." And then I think this all happened in about 48 hours. So the next, maybe 72, but yeah, that Sean contacted me. Then the agent contacted me the next day. This guy that from India, an Indian agent, really good guy actually, works really close with the club still. One of the good ones over there because there's a lot of cowboys in India and Asia. And yeah, he just kind of just asked if I was keen to go over, what my intentions were, and I just kind of said yes. I think everything was right for me to go there. They were bringing a Spanish coach in, which was great, and then I found out who the actual coach was, and then I was like yes, because if it was anyone else, I would kind of be unsure. And the Spanish coach was a guy named Albert Roca, who was assistant to Rijkaard at Barcelona, Galatasaray, and he was from Spain as well. And what kind of made that easier was I had Gombau at Adelaide, and he knew who Albert was, obviously, because they're both from Barcelona. So it made my decision a lot easier. So yeah, and I think within 3 days I was off on a plane to India, which was pretty nuts because you kind of rewind a year or two before that, I probably would have never said I went and played in India. So
no, and how that's a quick turnaround to get a message from someone and then be on a plane to India. What did you have to arrange? Like, how did I suppose you spoke to the agent. How did the contract negotiators go? Did they say, look, this is what we want to offer you? And you go, all right, yep, done?
Yeah, it was again, there's a bit of back and forth with that. But the back and forth was pretty quick. I think because they were prepping for AFC Cup game. So they wanted to get me over pretty quick. So they went back and forth a couple of times and then ended up sorting it out. But probably the paperwork getting over there is one of the hardest things. And then when you get there, you realize, how advanced kind of we are in terms of processing kind of information and getting paperwork done. So all the contract stuff was pretty easy. They sent it in English. It didn't come in, it wasn't in foreign language. So that was easy to do. All the nitty gritty details of the contract were really really easy. I think the hardest part was when I got over there, then getting everything sorted, then then doing all the stuff back here, because as I said in that thing I sent you with the taxes and the residency and all that sort of stuff, I had no idea about all that sort of stuff back then. I'm well aware of it now, but I didn't have any information from kind of anyone about going over there and earning foreign income and setting up bank accounts and what I had to do here to be a non-resident and all that sort of stuff. I knew exchange rates, but the best way to send money home and to do all that sort of stuff. So yeah, I think getting there was the easy part. I think being there, that was when it kind of take the football away. The football was good. The football was really good. It was all the other stuff that's really kind of slow and you pull your hair out of a lot of things.
Just a lot of stuff you got to deal with, off the pitch to as you say, settle in. So do they, like the club there, would they help you find, say, an apartment or a house for the car, things like that, to help you sort of get settled?
The majority of the team lived in Bangalore, which is obviously a great city, very kind of modernized. It's a big IT hub, so a lot of Europeans work there. Very well developed. Again, in my team, there was an English lad who I lived with in an apartment block, which again, I think maybe majority of the team lived in that same apartment block. It was well maintained. There was a pool, there was a gym. We got well looked after. Didn't need a car because I was too scared to drive there anyway. So because it's chaos. But yeah, like you jump in an Uber for probably 40 minutes and it cost a total of $7. So, so it was easy to get around in that sense. And again, getting there, them doing everything for you, putting an apartment, making life easy for football, they were on top of. And it's kind of funny, setting up the bank stuff and setting up all the other nitty gritty stuff, they were there to help. It's just kind of the length it took to get everything done. You're just kind of like, why is stuff taking so long? Or, they'd come back and forth like 100 times and you'd probably had already answered the same question, before a few times. And it was just getting used to that, getting used to obviously the culture. They obviously do things very different compared to the way we do things here. But that was just kind of part of the journey and part of the, not going there kind of closed-minded and, and then you learn to be very patient when you're there with everything. So again, having people that had played there already, the English lad that I met and good friends with now, he was very good because obviously he'd been there 3 years and he knew all the ins and outs.
Yeah.
So he kind of guided me along the way. And once you settled in, then it was kind of smooth sailing. So,
And do you find, I suppose, that if you are a young kid going over, I mean, you would have been older then, but it doesn't matter the age. I suppose if you go somewhere like that and you're on your own with no help, it could be really overwhelming. I suppose trying to latch on to another foreigner that could speak English would have made a huge difference.
Yeah, definitely. I think if you're going in blind, it could, you kind of, you could probably get the wool pulled over your eyes a little bit. You're not sure kind of, how they work and what their mentality is towards you and how they operate on a day to day. And again, with having him there, it made my life a lot easier. And then in the second year that you're there, you kind of, what to expect. If you move clubs, you know what's going to happen. So yeah, again, it does make a big difference because the other two foreigners that were there were from Spain. And even though they spoke a little bit of English and the coach was Spanish, I think initially they found it a lot more difficult than me because, again, they were trying to get stuff done and their English was obviously limited. And I was having a tough time at one point, but they were having more of a tough time just because of the language barrier. So, and then the coach would have to get involved with them and try and help them out. So where I was just kind of like, and we're in Bangalore, a lot of people do speak English, like a majority do. So it's like the most common language because there's so many different, languages in India, depending on which city you're in or which state. Most people will speak English, especially, in businesses, organizations, corporations. English is kind of their first language. So yeah.
It's a fun, yeah. It's a lot bigger now as well. There's a lot of people going in there. Is it somewhere you would recommend for Aussies to? I think there's like 10 or 11 Aussies there currently, isn't there?
Yeah, it's huge. It's a big market now. From Sean being there was a couple of coaches there before him as well. Like Arthur Papa spent some time there. And then obviously Sean was there. Then I was there. And then Eric Partaloo went there after me. And then kind of after that, there's just like an influx of just Aussies just going every year. And as you just mentioned, 10 or 11 there now. And I would definitely recommend players to go there. I think you've always got to be careful on which club you do go to and kind of, look at the city that you're going to be living in because it might not be for everyone. I could say 3 to 4 clubs, brilliant, go to. You don't even have to think about it. You're going to be treated well. Facilities are good. But there's a couple that are, say, northeast of India that are a bit isolated. There's not a lot there. So those little things you kind of have to weigh up. And especially if you've got family, if you've got kids. I didn't have any kids at the time, or I didn't have my little one at the time. So that was an easy decision for me. But all those little factors come into consideration, obviously, moving over there. But definitely would recommend going over there and playing. It's a, well-organized league. They do everything kind of extravagantly in the ISL. So they obviously got a lot of big owners and big businesses own those teams. And from when I was there, I think to now, the football's improved a lot because the foreigners they're getting every year are very good. They're from, your second division Spain's, Germany's. They're, coming here from the A-League now. They're at a good age. And they're starting to produce more local players now because they're bringing in foreign coaches to train their local coaches. They're setting up academies. They're doing all the right things. It's just that the population's so big that there's always going to be people that go missing. And that's just, one of the shortfalls of a country like that. But the progression over the last probably 5-10 years has been really hot. Has been really good.
Yeah, no, it definitely has, and you can see it more and more players that are going over there. It's obviously improving the game, and not just coming from Australia. There'd be people there, I'd imagine, from Brazil, from Europe, because they'd be offering decent money as well, wouldn't they? As opposed to playing, potentially in the A-League or in a lower league in Europe.
Yeah, and that's why players go, and that's no hiding that, and everyone knows that. It's the carrot's there to. If you're coming not towards the end, but even if you're 29, 30, 31, 32, if you're say you're playing here compared to or lower leagues in Europe, you can go there and the level's not going to be as high. So if you're considered a good player, and you can go there and you'll do well, and earn good money and save a lot of money while you're there, because a lot of the club look after a lot of the costs in terms of living, whether you're in hotels or whether you're in an apartment, and living's obviously quite cheap. So, going there and say for every $10 you earn, you might spend $1 or $2 compared to $5 or $4 or $5 here, or $5 or $6. So your savings are immense compared to what you would do here or potentially in Europe. So yeah, it's kind of it's a no-brainer for players that get that opportunity.
And do you find most of the contracts over there they offer you are in Indian rupee, or is it in US dollars?
So when I was there, my contract was in US dollars. So they had it clear in US dollars, but I got actually paid in Indian rupee. So it didn't really affect me when I was there. I think a lot of teams have changed now. I think it's obviously all the contracts are in US, but I think most are paying in US now. I think that's the case. Don't quote me on it, but I think a lot of people have kind of asked for that going there. They don't want to be paid in local currency because their currency is quite volatile and compared to obviously the US dollar. So, but yeah, when I was there, again, my contract was in US, got paid into Indian rupee. And again, I knew I had some people here that I asked about the exchange rate and what was better to get it in. But in talking to the club, they weren't going to change how they were, paying their players. So I just kind of had to stick with it. So
yeah, I've found that recently. Actually, we've spoken with a few people that same thing. Their contracts in US dollars, but they get paid in the local currency, whether it's in Malaysia, Japan, India.
Yeah,
and it can prove a little bit more difficult than to move your money back home if that's the goal, like to move it back to Australia.
Yeah.
But also you do have to be aware that, the club's been doing this for however many years. They're not going to change it for one Aussie.
Nah.
It's difficult, but it is something that we recommend people ask is, can we get paid in US if possible? It just makes your life a bit easier, to move money around and bring it home.
Yeah, I definitely recommend if that was one, especially in the contract, again, if they're going to ask that question, definitely, and try and get it in US dollars, just to make that easier and easier to move around. But yeah, again, as you said, they're not going to just change for one person. Well, not for and if it's maybe a big star, they might change it for, but potentially most Aussies, they're not going to do that for. So.
And with obviously you said it was a very quick turnaround, the initial contact from India to being over there. Looking back on it now, and then you've got a lot of stuff to sort out here and there, is that where you would recommend an Aussie reaching out to the PFA if something like this came up to say, all right, I've been offered this, what do I do to make sure that they can have help in regards to being put in touch with the right people for tax, for accounting, for currency exchange, whatever it is?
Yeah, definitely. And, now, every year we when talking to our members at the clubs, and these are things that we do go over. So they get fact sheets on all of these in all these areas about if heading overseas, one, they can come to us for advice, and we work with external providers such as yourself and such as other people that we've teamed up with the PFA that can help in these areas in regards to exchange rate, taxes, the residency side. And you do find a lot. They'll, the legal side will get a contract come through across the desk or through email, and see the ins and outs of that, and then they'll ask quite a few questions. And I've had a couple of phone calls from players that went over there asking about exchange rates and best way to send money home. And if they'd asked me 2 years before, we'd have no idea because I didn't know going there. But now we can just send them on to those experts in the field, and instead of us relaying half information or cloudy information, they can go straight to you guys and give them the best way to handle their finances in whichever the country they're going to. So I think they're lucky now. I didn't look, maybe that was available when I went over there and I just didn't know about it. I can't really remember, but I think a lot of players are aware now because a lot of players are going there, and it's talked about a lot more, throughout teams and throughout the league.
Yeah, it's definitely more prevalent now because, as you say, it's a big global world. Everyone does travel a lot more, and especially for football or whatever sport. and it is something that would come up quite often. So yeah, and with the just when you touched on the contracts there, so if a club, sent you a contract or sends a young Aussie a contract, one, I suppose their agent would look over it if they have an agent. But secondly, is that something else you would recommend? Send through the PFA, get the legal team to look over it and sort of point out anything that, or I guess talk to them they might have no experience in this type of thing. You've got this contract, you just want to play football, but you have to make sure that you're being treated correctly as well.
Yeah, I guess depending on, I guess if that person's agent has worked in that market before, then they should be across most kind of items in that contract. They should be, well aware. They should, they've obviously worked with people there in that country before, so that would help a lot. If it's the case where if an agent's got them something and they're not aware of that market, definitely go to come to the PFA, because, one, our player relations and our legal side have kind of seen contracts all over the world, from India to Indonesia, Malaysia to Europe to wherever it may be. So they know the key items to look for. They know the red flags to look for. So, and it's, if you remember, it's free. It's not like it's being a member, and I think goes a long way, because you've got access to so many people and so much expertise in different areas. I think, and I'm not just saying that because I worked there, because I was always a member when I played. But having those people kind of at the drop of a hat is not something that everyone has access to. So, and the turnaround on contracts, because obviously everyone, like at the PFA, we know how quick, deals can come and go. I think most of the time a contract might come through and, they'll get back, like they'll try and get it turned around in about 24 hours, 48 hours to get back to the player in regards to kind of what needs to be done, or whether it's worth considering or not. So yeah, for me, it's a no-brainer if you don't have that advice, or if someone's not experienced in that market, definitely come to us, and we can kind of give you that advice.
Awesome, mate. Well, look, being conscious of time, because I reckon we could probably speak for another hour.
Yeah.
I love this stuff. I will wrap it up and let you go. And I think actually we might do a part 2 around something else at a later date.
Sure.
Because this has been really interesting. But if you had to provide any advice just from your own experience going through, youth teams in Europe over to India, I know you touched on Indonesia as well. What would it be for a young player now?
Well, I don't know. It's difficult, because I think the whole environment's different, and society's different as well. But I think patience is a big one. I think I've seen a lot of young players now that when they have a setback, they don't accept it well, or as well as kind of the generation before them did. And they're in a real hurry to kind of obviously get to the top. And everyone wants to get to the top, but it's not going to happen for everyone. So I think patience is a big one. And setbacks are going to happen. Not everyone has the same kind of clear path. It's not a straight line that's going to get you there. So I'd say that, and good support system with a lot of knowledge, and talk to people that have played the game, that have lived those experiences, is a big one. And I think if most young players are in A-League systems, they've got those people there now, because they're surrounded by those people. So I'd just maximize the resources you have. And that's just not people, but if you're training, maximize your training. Don't just leave anything to chance, and don't think, I'll go do something else later on in the day. Just kind of continue to work on your craft, because it might not be happening then and there, but you kind of put in those hours, it will happen. If you want it bad enough, I think it'll happen. So, and yeah, I think the patience, hard work, and that good support system are 3 big factors that will kind of help you along the way. Again, you can tick all those boxes, and you might not never make it. You might not make it to the top, and that's just football, and that's just professional sport. So, that's probably some advice I'd probably give to youngsters. Thinking about even just playing professional football here and going overseas as well. Yeah.
No, that's fantastic. And that's, again, another driver behind, this podcast and interviews like this, is to tap into your knowledge and experience, so that hopefully over time we'll have a good catalogue of episodes like this and like that. People can pick from what they need, and nothing better than learning from people that have had that real life experience. So, Cam, thank you very much for taking the time to chat to me today. It's been awesome.
Nah, it's been, as you said, it's been a pleasure. And as you said, we could probably talk for another couple of hours, but it's been awesome. Again, again, in my role now, like helping young players, helping players, doesn't matter what age they are. It's just, I think it's something that I enjoy, and if we can help the younger generation make kind of better informed decisions, whether it's here or abroad, it's only going to benefit us as kind of a footballing nation and them as kind of individuals. So thank you.
100%. No, thank you very much.
Thanks, Chris.
See you, mate. Thank you.